It's been a busy week in the US as Republican contender Ron DeSantis announced on Wednesday he would run against President Donald Trump for the Republican ticket. Let's cross to Washington, speak to Julia Manchester, political reporter with The Hill, and Peter Chowka, who's a political analyst. Julia, first of all, Ron DeSantis' campaign launch was a technical disaster. How damaging is that going to be for him?
I think it depends on who you're talking to when you're asking how damaging it will it be. Obviously, those of us in the media and the political class here in Washington were, laser focused on this. And, at the time when there were so many technical glitches, a lot of people were, sort of tweeting, what's going on? I hear elevator music. I keep on hearing Elon Musk talking. There's weird, glitches, and we keep getting kicked out of the space. So there's been that complaint. And then, of course, you have former President Trump really zeroing in on this, calling this a disaster and posting a video on Instagram of a rocket, launching, then exploding with the logo Ron 2024 on it. So he's using this against him. But when you move outside of that circle into the early primary states and caucus states of Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, the three states right now that matter most, particularly Iowa, to Ron DeSantis, I don't think a lot of Americans are, and those voters are paying too close attention because those aren't, most Americans just simply aren't on Twitter. So I think it's damaging in the sense that Donald Trump will use this as a soundbite. The news media will talk about it. But for voters themselves who are going to be one-on-one with Ron DeSantis, and he's kicking off his campaign tour in Iowa next week, I don't think it's as big of a deal.
Okay, well Peter Chowka, what do you think Ron DeSantis' appeal, or pitch rather, to American voters, and first of all, obviously, Republicans, might be?
Well, he is trying to be MAGA light, that is, make America great again, the Trump clarion call, without all of the considerable baggage that President Trump carries. The country has not only been divided between Democrats and Republicans in the past 2 to 6 years, but the Republican Party is now divided among those who support President Trump, whatever happens, however many times he's indicted or whatever, and those who would like to see a new look forward, a new way, new hope, but with conservative principles. And I think DeSantis obviously represents that for many people. And I agree with Julia that his launch was considered a failure, but that is on Twitter, but mostly by his Democrat and Republican opponents. And he raised $8 million in the 24 hours after that launch. And by the way, he's not the only one who's trying to run against President Trump. We have Tim Scott, senator from South Carolina, black African-American conservative, who also announced his candidacy this past weekend. I wouldn't write him off yet either. He projects a very positive, unifying message of hope. And as an African-American, I think he, just by his personhood, can reach a much wider constituency than many of the Republicans are used to.
But Julia, do you think there are a lot of people out there who like what Trump stands for, this whole "Make America Great Again," but don't like Trump the person? Can you sort of separate out
I
the
think
two?
in the general electorate, there are people who like Trump's policies. In terms of "Make America Great Again," I think that's something that the conservative, very pro-Trump electorate really likes. But in terms of his fiscal policies, particularly, I think in the general electorate, there are a lot of people that like that. And I think there's a lot of Republican primary voters who like, Trump's message. But you're absolutely right in the premise of the question. There is this question about, Trump himself and whether he has too much baggage. And that's what Ron DeSantis is really trying to zero in on. The thing is, Trump is right now leading the Republican primary field very handily. Ron DeSantis is the closest thing he has to a rival, but even Ron DeSantis is running behind him in second place. So I think what you're seeing is a lot of these other candidates like Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, trying to take out Ron DeSantis right now or attack Ron DeSantis so they can get that much closer to being second place to Donald Trump. But I guess one warning I have is we are incredibly early in this race. I mean, I think we're 7 months out from the Iowa caucuses, a little over 7 months. So a lot could change between now and then. But right now, I think the Republican primary base is pretty firmly supporting Donald Trump.
Yeah, but what's interesting about this, Peter, is that, yes, among Republicans, Trump might have a big lead, but if you look at the wider American electorate, it does seem that he and DeSantis are much more evenly placed to win against President Biden.
Yes, and I think President Biden and his Democrat handlers would prefer to see President Trump get the nomination because they feel that he's the Republican who President Biden can be assured of beating. Might I also add that the unknown factor here, which makes the predictions very difficult, as Julia just alluded to, is what's going to happen with these possible or likely indictments of President Trump going forward. He's facing 3 very serious investigations. All of them might involve indictments. Plus, he has a trial already scheduled for next March in New York, where he was indicted criminally by the Attorney General Bragg there on charges. So, it's unknown. We're in terra incognita here to try to figure out and predict how that would enter into the race and even the determination of many of his supporters. Will they follow him even if he's indicted and or convicted? It's just a total novelty in the history of American politics, and we just don't know.
Julia, what about the Democrat side? We have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Marianne Williamson joining Joe Biden in the race. Have either of them got any chance?
Look, I think there's always a chance to gain some traction, but I don't think either of these 2 candidates will get the nomination. Poll after poll shows that Joe Biden is the favorite. He is the current president. He's the incumbent. He has the name ID. The Democratic National Committee and the broader Democratic operation here in the U.S. is very firmly behind him. That they could make headlines or, that kind of a thing, but I don't think they are much of a threat at this point to Joe Biden. In fact, we've seen a lot of headlines this week about Marianne Williamson and a number of her, campaign staffers leading. So maybe some turmoil in that camp right now.
Okay, Julia Manchester from The Hill and Peter Chowka, who's a political analyst.